You can learn more Korean vocabulary more quickly by learning Satoori. 안녕하세요. 한국어 패치의 이한입니다. Welcome back to Satoori 패치. If you haven't watched this series from the beginning, I recommend starting from the first video, so here is a link to that video. Also, at the end of this video, I have a quick announcement about how you can get a free download that I'm offering through our newly launched Korean Patch website. So make sure you watch through to the end of the video to get that information. Anyway, to recap what I talked about in the last video of the Satoori 패치 series, learning about Satoori is super beneficial to your Korean from the very beginning because it gives you extra reference points for all of the things you're learning. I explained that in more detail in the other video, so just, like I said, watch from the first video so you can understand my entire argument for this. Today I want to talk about how vocabulary works similarly to grammar. It works in a very similar way, where you get this extra reference point for everything that you're learning before it comes to English, but also because it makes you more curious about Korean etymology and pronunciation and sound changes over time and regions. So the concept that I explained in the last video in this series carries over to vocabulary as well, like I just said. Having extra reference points for vocabulary really helped me increase my ability to recognize words in context, which in turn, I think, increased my efficiency when it came to acquiring the language. Obviously, retention of vocabulary comes through acquisition. It comes through acquiring it. And we acquire language when we understand messages in context. So when I was first learning Korean, actually I did all of my Korean learning right here in Busan, where I am right now. When I was first learning Korean, of course, everything was entirely new to me. All of the sounds, all of the grammar, everything was new. One of my first Satoori memories that I have was actually from the very beginning of my Korean learning journey while I was working at an English school here in Korea. And one of my coworkers, who was an older Korean woman, came over to me and said, "선생님, 욕 봤습니다," as I left. Obviously, I had never heard this word. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I was trying to actively learn Korean. So I asked her to repeat it, and then I asked her to write it down for me on a little pad of paper that I carried around with me. So I proceeded to look it up later, what she was talking about, because I still wasn't able to hold a good conversation in Korean yet. And since I knew a little bit about Korean word construction, I knew that there were probably two parts to this word, 욕 and 보다. 욕 is a 한자 that means like a curse or a swear. We would use this for a curse word or a swear word in English. And 보다, of course, means to see. So when I saw 봤습니다, okay, I know we're talking about the past tense of see, but 욕, at that time I had no idea what it meant. So when I look up 욕, what comes out was curse. I saw a curse? No, that can't be right. She's smiling, the context is wrong. I knew this had to be an idiom or something like that because it didn't make any sense for her to say something like that to me in that context. So I looked it up on Naver, which is a popular Korean search engine, 욕 봤습니다, and what came up was 동남방언 수고했습니다. Now, 동남 means east, south, so southeast in English, and 방언 means regional speech or land speech. 방 is kind of hard to translate to English clearly. So the 한자어, the higher, more academic terminology for 경상도 사투리 is 동남방언, southeastern dialect, I guess we could say. But anyway, I didn't know what 수고했습니다 meant either. 수고했습니다. So I looked that up. Now, since that's 표준어, it's much easier to find people talking about that word in English online. And so I found people explaining that this means you've done great work today. You've worked hard. Basically, this is what you say to people when you leave work, what you say to your coworkers. So I learned that 욕 봤습니다 means 수고했습니다, which means great work today. Instead of going from Satoori to English, I went through that standard Korean filter one more time, which really solidified what that word meant, especially since I knew I was going to be hearing this a lot from my coworkers going forward. I was intrigued by the fact that there was this other way of saying stuff specific to where I was living. So I started writing down anything that sounded strange or anything people were saying that I couldn't recognize from any of my textbooks or my learning materials that I was using. As I learned more and more 표준어 equivalents of things that I was learning that turned out to be Satoori, I started to pick up on the pronunciation change patterns and the intonation patterns. That's something I'll talk about in another video. But I started picking up on these patterns that become more and more visible and audible as you see the equivalents in other versions of Korean. These words started to stick out to me as strange. This didn't sound like standard Korean. It didn't sound like the other words that I was seeing in my textbooks and, podcast listening materials, on TV, etc. So all of this may seem like a waste of time, a bunch of details that don't really matter, a bunch of book learning that won't really help you with practical usage of Korean. And I think that means you've missed the point. Aside from all of the knowledge that I gained about Korean and all of the connections I was able to make and starting to understand more about linguistics just intuitively, it made me spend time with the language. I was tricking myself into spending a lot more time with the language than I would have. And I was getting over the fact that, okay, here's all this stuff that's the same as the standard Korean that I can more or less understand. What's that one word? I was no longer bogged down by the fact that I couldn't understand everything in a sentence. And I kind of just let my brain fill in the holes, which is what you're supposed to do when you're trying to acquire a language. These I+1 sentences, right? I kind of forced sentences to become that for myself, I think. Now when I look back on this, I like to think of it as CrossFit. I'm not, the most fit guy in the world. I'm sure you can tell, but at the end of the day, exercise is about a couple of different things. You're either stretching, you're trying to get your heart rate up, or you're trying to overexert your muscles so they tear a little bit and heal larger, right? You can do that in a variety of different ways. You can jump on boxes and throw ropes around at a CrossFit center. You can jump on a bicycle, go for a jog, do Zumba. Really, the point is to find some kind of exercise that helps you stick with it and do the effective thing for the longest amount of time possible. So I found that I was able to trick myself into spending more time not worrying about whether or not I could understand the language, because I was hunting down these differences between what I was hearing on the street and what I was seeing on the screen or listening to in my headphones. I have one other point that I want to make in this video since we're talking about vocabulary. Satoori vocabulary is important for every speaker of Korean, whether or not they choose to standardize their speech. Native speakers of any language are roughly aware of how other speakers of that same language use the language. You might not know everything. You might not be able to pick up all the details of what's different between two different speakers right away, but you do know what words they use for other things. You don't need subtitles for someone from Texas if you're from New York. I guarantee if you're American, you know that some people say Coke whenever they're talking about any kind of carbonated beverage. What kind of Coke you want? Sprite, right? I'm sure you're aware that people say soda and pop. You may not know what regions say it, but if someone says this word that you don't say, it's not like it ruins your ability to understand the sentence. I also guarantee you understand when someone says gon instead of gonna or going to, like what you gonna do later. If I gave you the sentence, hey brother, grab me one of them ziggy bloops, will ya? And you focus on the word ziggy bloops. Okay, I understand what this guy's saying, but I don't know what a ziggy bloop is. You've gotten over the fact that the rest of the sentence is also different, but you've just accepted that you basically understand what this person is talking about. Minus, of course, the word that's missing. What you're doing is you're allowing yourself to enjoy the ambiguity, move past it, and hunt down that one thing that you want to know about how this dialect works. Like I talked about with my good buddy Johnson in the last video, which you can watch right here, the interview that we did, there is literally no point to closing yourself off to certain parts of the language. Instead of just being open to them passively though, what I am suggesting you do is actively open your mind to these things, actively seek them out and learn what they mean. The reason I'm telling you to do this is because I believe it really sped up my learning process. It gave me direct benefits because it was one of the things that helped me go monolingual while learning the language as much as possible. But it also gave me indirect benefits because it convinced me to spend a lot of time ignoring the ambiguity of the language, just letting it go, and hunting down things that I could learn the equivalents for monolingually. As in, this in Satoori is this in Pyojunal. And if it came out in English later, that's cool too. Okay, so that's it for this rant. In the next video in this series, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how learning Satoori from the beginning of my Korean experience tuned my ear to the differences in pronunciation and especially intonation. It even improved my ability to listen to other people's English as well. I hope this video was helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Hey, just a quick announcement for everybody. We have launched our Korean Patch website. You can find it at koreanpatch.co, koreanpatch.co. Through the website, I'm offering a free download. It's a guide to persistent grammar puzzles in Korean. So these are pieces of grammar that are very fundamental, things you see very commonly from the very beginning of learning Korean, but they're extremely hard to understand if you're a native English speaker. The way to download this guide is by joining our mailing list. It's really easy, it's free. It's going to be the way that we let everyone know in the future about the courses and other, downloadable materials that we're going to develop for Korean learners who are really serious. And it's just going to be the easiest way to get all of the newest updates on what's going on with Korean Patch. So just head over to our website, join the mailing list, get that download, and let me know what you think. I'll see you over there.